We're going to finish up Chapter 1 with the process of science. We need to remember that science is not only a body of knowledge, but it's also a method or process that we discover things around us. Biology is the study of life, bio meaning life, ology meaning the study of, and just like all other scientists, biologists usually test a hypothesis using what we refer to as the scientific method. This is just a drawn out scheme of what the scientific method would entail. Observations are made, questions are asked. Before we generate a hypothesis, though, we do have to spend a little bit of time in research, and that research needs to be looking at what other scientists have discovered based on the question that you have, the observation that you have, and you need to make sure that those research methods and research resources are reliable. And that leads us to a hypothesis. A hypothesis is just your if-then statement for the most part, your prediction of what's going to happen, and it has to be testable. And then the experiment and observations, the hypothesis is tested, and it's step by step because someone else should be able to repeat that. After you look at your data and analyze it, you're led to a conclusion, and that conclusion is going to do one of two things. It's always going to either support or reject your hypothesis. If it supports your hypothesis, other scientists can explore this and repeat this and could eventually lead to what we call a scientific theory. However, if your hypothesis has to be rejected, that's not mean that things are over. All that means is that you come up and you regenerate a new hypothesis and you go through the process again. All right, so in your geometry class, you've been talking about inductive and deductive reasoning and logic statements. So just by definition in science, inductive reasoning occurs when a person uses creative thinking to combine isolated facts and make them into a whole. So they come up with a hypothesis, which is going to be an explanation for the natural event, and determine how to test the hypothesis by using deductive reasoning, and that uses if-then logic. So the scientific theory, by definition, these are concepts that join together well-supported and related hypotheses, and they can be supported by observations, experiments, by data. Some examples are the cell theory, homeostasis, genes, ecosystems, and evolution. And we'll get into these as we go throughout this year. But the underlying unifying concept of biology is thought to be the theory of evolution. So we're going to look at a controlled study. We have controlled studies with two types of groups. We have a control group and we have an experimental group. The control group is our normal group. The experimental group is what receives the treatment. And the experimental group will include the independent variable. An independent variable is what's changed or what's different between the experimental and the control group. And we're going to measure that by measuring the dependent variable. And let's look at an example. Here's the hypothesis. A pigeon pea winter wheat rotation will cause winter wheat production to increase as well as or better than using nitrogen fertilizer, and that's very testable. The prediction isn't always a part of just a general scientific method that you carry out in the high school classroom, but this person thinks that the wheat production will, following growth of pigeon peas, will surpass the wheat biomass during using nitrogen fertilizer treatment, and that's what they're going to test. So what they do is they have test pots set up, and our control pot is going to be the wheat with no fertilization. That's our control. One test pot is going to have 45 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare in this pot. This one test pot is going to have 90, and this is going to be the crop rotation test pot. So even though we have three separate tests going on, it's one hypothesis that keeps them together, controls them together, connects them. Okay, so the control has no fertilizer treatment. The test, like I said, were the ones with the varying amounts of nitrogen fertilizer and the one where it's actually rotated. Everything else is going to stay the same. This is called constants, because these constants are going to stay the same whether we're talking about our control group or our experimental groups. So here are the results. So we have done this for, if you notice, 3 years. This wasn't something that just went on for a week. It's done for 3 years, and the data was collected, and you can analyze the data now that it's in graph form. One of the things I want to bring out that I don't like about this graph is that we don't have a good title, a good working title. And that's one of the things we're going to be working on during this year in biology is how to set up a graph and include all the necessary things to make it a good solid graph. So if you look here, we can look at the data, and it looks like that the more nitrogen that you put in it, the better it's going to grow. And if you would have stopped at the end of the first year, that would have been what you would have thought. But you look at the next year and notice that the rotation crop is actually growing more than the ones with the additional fertilizer or at a faster rate. And by year 3, you notice that the crop rotation worked so much better than adding the fertilizer or using no fertilizer at all. So the conclusion was the hypothesis was supported. At the end of the 2 years, the yield of winter wheat following a pigeon winter wheat crop rotation was better than the other types of plants. All right, so the final thing we're going to talk about is science and social responsibility. Due to advances in technology, which is the application for a practical purpose, application of science for a practical purpose, technology is increasing on a daily basis. And there's benefits to it that we all enjoy, and there's also drawbacks. There are ethical and moral issues that surround the use of technology, and that has to be decided by everyone as a whole, as by the human race, not just by the group of scientists that come up with it. And that'll take us through the end of chapter 1.